It's the worst of the CBC for December 26, 2019, the show where I watch the CBC so you don't have to. Alright, here's our Arctic edition, which is me. We're in the Arctic. It's minus 20-something out. It's cold. We're not going to sure how this is going to turn out, but we're doing it anyway. In the Arctic, there is no real-time CBC, so this is actually the National of last night, which is Christmas night, the National reviewed today, and there are a few stories that we can get into that they just didn't cover properly that I think illustrate a very good point of how the news can inform you, but misinform you through information. And, okay, straight off on the Rosemary Barden scale, we have to talk. The first story was about the royal family. That is an automatic +1 on the Rosemary Barden scale, because I hate stories about the royal family, because they're just simply really, 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 really boring. At least they did mention it in Prince Andrew's connection to Jeffrey Epstein. Didn't really hammer on it, but it was mentioned, so good on them. Now, the two stories that we're going to cover that they covered but improperly are the Raptors Christmas Day basketball game, which, good for the Raptors, I love them, but Enes Kanter, a Turkish dissident from Erdogan, he was allowed to come into Canada. So actually good on the Trudeau government for letting him come into Toronto to play basketball. And here's where they cover the story, where they just don't tell you everything. So Turkey's reason they call him a terrorist or whatever is because he backs a certain Turkish cleric, they tried to claim Islamic cleric, who is anti-Erdogan, who's actually a pro-democracy. So they said, oh, he was involved in the coup against Erdogan, and they say he's a terrorist, and at least they allowed him to say, oh, I'm fighting for democracy. But it's by not really explaining what is going on in Turkey clearly to people leads to a lot of confusion and misinformation, and people not really understanding. And I don't really know why they do it. I actually do. I think it's narrative-based because, I mean, Donald Trump is denying the Armenian genocide. It's only him and Ilhan Omar. And I would be willing to go down the rabbit hole of why is he being so friendly to Turkey when he shouldn't be. I mean, if you watch the show a lot, my biggest problem with Obama, and I've called Obama the Neville Chamberlain of the 21st century, because he was so naive on Iran. So incredibly naive. Now, naivety on Turkey is a little more acceptable than Iran, not much, because Iran will openly shout death to America, death to Israel, our goal is to get a nuclear bomb and destroy the world. And radical Islam, whereas Erdogan is a little more tactful about how he goes about trying to Islamize the world. And Erdogan is pretty much an ally of Islamism. He is the man who's he is on record saying there is no such thing as moderate Islam. It's Islam or not. Like, he's a hardliner. He's been friendly with ISIS. Like, he's not a friend to the world, especially the Western world. So, by just not explaining what the coup was, you need to know a bit about Turkey to understand this coup. There have been a lot of coups in Turkey. Part of the function of the military in Turkey is to keep the country secular. So it's written into the Turkish constitution that if the government were to get too Islamic, the military is supposed to throw a coup and remove that government. Now, Erdogan, when he got in, he was smart in the sense that he governed like what we'd call a libertarian economic conservative, right? Deregulated markets, helped bring back the economy, and that's good. So he gained popularity, and when he was popular, he started to institute slowly some very Islamist laws. And the number one thing, or one of the big things he did, is he took a ban off of religious school scholars, so Islamic scholars couldn't go into the military. This makes sense if the goal of the military is to keep the country secular. He started banning that. He started to bring his own people and Islamists into the military, gained position that he kind of had half of it. Then the coup, he claims it's outside orchestrated, but it looked pretty much orchestrated by Erdogan himself to sort of flush out his enemies and then have the friendly part of the army take onto the coup. He was able to bring people onto the streets pretty quickly. It looked like he knew it was coming and basically used it to purge and then used it to take sort of emergency powers, a standard dictator move. And by not understanding all of this, and the fact that Enes Kanter has actually spoken out, he's pro-democracy, pro-Western, by not fully explaining this, it leads people to be sort of have the illusion of being informed on issues like Turkey. So I feel like that needs clarification. Number two is they did a year-end review on Brexit where they turned the two reporters into like these heroes, like, oh, we covered Brexit, aren't we brave? And there was one great line that became that he was saying like, oh, it's really strong emotion. We decided to cover that passion. I'm like, actually, that's true. That is true. You have been covering the emotion behind Brexit, not Brexit. And then he said, paused, and why it's happening. Like, okay, now it's a lie. Because they have not been covering Brexit in anywhere near adequate territory for my liking. Now, they really have not talked about the fact that the real reason that you need a Brexit is because the European Union is untenable. Right? There's just the standard corporate reasons. We can talk about immigration, which is a big factor too. But again, like the Greek economy and the German economy can't be on the same monetary scale. Like, you can't have that. Like, the Greek economy is not a strong economy. The Southern European economies and the Northern European economies are so very different that when you merge the dollars together, right, you get you get a situation where it really screws over either the tourism industry and the working class in the southern economies. Plus, they have their own problems about lying about inflation numbers and whatnot, so they got there. Thank you. Oh, it's some winter sports going on down there. Okay. So that, and they really did not cover the fact that, just how prevalent the the pro-Brexit movement was. The Manifest people, like Boris Johnson won overwhelmingly on Brexit. The Brexit referendum happened. The Brexit party won massively in the European Parliament. It was just a new party that said Brexit, like basically screw you, European Union, and they won. This is again where they give the illusion of being informed, because they say things about Brexit and they interview different media personalities and they bring in the emotion of, very high turmoil, and it involves all these different issues and there's lots of angst. And I'm a real big fan of Brexit because, again, we could talk about it, but from a global elite perspective level, there's lots of panic being put around Brexit, and I think it will be really, really good. It's fun for the British people when all this panic and doomsday predictions just don't come true. Because I think that's one of the most corrosive parts of our political system, or media especially, is the massive panic over nothing, this pushing of panic and fear on the population. If Brexit happens, what happens? It's British fault, everyone's going to be poor, we're going to take it over, like all this catastrophizing, which is based on nothing solid, but being pushed by other ideologues. When this doesn't happen, when the UK does not collapse into nothingness, I think it'll be a great I told you so, one, for the Brexiteers, and two, for people like me saying, like, just don't listen to all this stupid panic in the media. It's based on nothing. It's ill-informed. So where does this rank on the Rosemary Barton scale? Christmas, they weren't really covering anything, but it's Christmas, so I don't really hold that against them, which is why I'm not doing any omissions. We'll just give it a 5 on the Rosemary Barton scale, because Rosemary Barton was not on TV, so that it was going to be a 6, but then it's a 5 because there was no Rosemary Barton, which is always a plus in the National. So I will see everyone tomorrow. It will be cold, but I'll be out here. Goodbye.